The UN Secretary General, in the meanwhile, and his wife came to some meetings in what are called salons. A salon is when someone hosts a very nice meeting in a private home with dignitaries, and you have a guest, usually some surprise guest or some interesting character like me, to come in and inform the New York 100 about what's going on. So that's what I did, and they were incredibly successful. Subsequent to that, Mrs. Boutros-Ghali invited us to have a meeting at the UN so I could brief a lot of the diplomats and friends of hers in the UN who were supportive of ending secrecy and making peaceful interplanetary contact. And actually, Leah Ghali herself hosted that for me at the United Nations. I'm just trying to give you sort of a sense of what happened before May of 2001 with what's now very famous National Press Club event. So this was all going on with the idea that if we were to provide the correct information to the president and to his advisors and to members of Congress, the key people in Congress, they would do the right thing and would disclose this information, because the Cold War had ended, and we thought, here's a fig leaf to put on the secrecy, even though it's a bit of a misdirect. But politicians always need to have a cover, a CYA. Washington's all about cover your ass. So to explain 40 years of secrecy, they could have said, well, during the Cold War tensions, we didn't want to throw into that mix the fact that we're being visited by interstellar civilizations, and with also a program to study what their technologies are. And now that the Cold War is over, we can come clean. So I was recommending that they use that as an excuse for the chicanery that had gone on between 1956 and 1990s, 40 years. Well, it was an interesting thing that happened. In the fall of 1993, I was given a lecture at the Colorado State University, hosted by astronaut Brian O'Leary and Maury Albertson, who was one of the co-founders of the Peace Corps. And they became very, very close friends and supporters of what we were doing. And in that presentation, I laid out the entire sort of manifesto of justifying disclosure, ending secrecy, and what we should do. And at the end of that talk, and I don't know, there were maybe 800 people there, 1,000, something like that. There was a man, a little bald man, standing at the back of the room. And he wouldn't leave, and he waited till almost everyone was gone. He came up to me and he said, Dr. Greer, I think I can help you with this. I know some folks in Washington who want to know about this, but they're not getting any good answers. I said, well, like who? And I thought he was going to say, you know, staffers for Congressman blah blah from Nowhereville, Montana. And he said, well, I'm very good friends with the Director of Central Intelligence, the CIA director, and he would like to be briefed on this. And of course I said, well, that's a good start. So initially that meeting was set up for November of 1993, and it got pushed back because of scheduling conflicts that he had and I had to December 13th, 1993. My wife, Emily, was there with me. And the cover story was a dinner party just here in Arlington at this man's home, and with his CI director and with his, the CI director's wife, Dr. Sue Woolsey, who was the Chief Operating Officer of the National Academy of Sciences. So, which is very good, because I feel, well, we can get two birds with one stone here, because she's a very senior scientist in a very prestigious institution. So again, we got a nanny for the kids, flew up to Washington, had this meeting. Now, normally when you meet with someone at cabinet level, it's a, very tight, maybe 20 minutes, 15, 30. This went on for about 3 hours. And the initial part of it, I had this whole briefcase and portfolio full of all these images of photographs and documents and cases and all this stuff. And after about 10 minutes, the CI director said, okay, I know this. We know that they exist, and it turns out he and his wife had a sighting in New Hampshire when they were younger. I want to know, and this is the key question to answer, why won't they tell me and the president about it? I'm the CIA director. I said, well, that's another discussion. And at first, I got some hint of this when I got the letter, which I have in my archives, because subsequently, Woolsey tried to backpedal and say this briefing never happened. He publicly said so, and I can prove it to be a lie. I always say in Washington, how do you know they're lying? Their lips are moving. Lips are moving, that means they're lying. So, ouch. Did I just say that? Yeah, I did. It's on the record. There you go. So, but the letter I got describing the briefing from our host said that you're going to be the first person to brief the president's people and his CIA director on this issue because they've asked questions and they can't get anything through channels. Now, at that point, I have to say, I thought I was being zoomed. I really thought this was a prevarication and that this spy master, the CIA director, just wanted to pick my brain, find out what we were doing with folks like the Rockefellers and da-da-da. And it turned out he 100% was out of the loop. He knew nothing about these projects, and he was being completely deceived by those who had compartmented intelligence within the agency, the CIA, and he literally was the emperor that had no clothes, and so was the president. So it was at that point, on December 13th, 1993, that I realized that we were living in a country that had undergone a quiet coup d'etat decades earlier. That isn't talked about in the New York Times and Washington Post because it would be the biggest story ever and the biggest scandal ever. They'd rather talk about the blue stain on a dress and other trivialities, or the stain on a blue dress, and rather than talking about the truth. And we, at that point, had put together a white paper, which is in my first book about extraterrestrial intelligence, which you can get on our website at seriousdisclosure.com. And it describes basically the plan of what needed to be done by the chief executive, the president and his people, to end the secrecy. So I had that in my hands, and I was giving it to the CIA director as he was leaving, and he looked at me and he said, "How can we disclose that which we have no access to?" Very chilling question. So, in other words, if we were to push on this, then it would unveil the biggest constitutional crisis in the United States history. And no president wants to admit that they're out of the loop on important things. No one wants to admit that. Therefore, he said, we will do what we can do. I'll continue to look into this. Please continue to send any information you have to me through this contact. But we'll have to see what the president can do.